Money is never the problem. If you start meeting the needs of your community, either somebody will pay for it or the community themselves, depending on what kind of community you live in.
Hello and welcome to the Propel podcast, inspiration and innovation to grow your church. I'm your host, Larry Woodsell. If God is giving you big dreams for growing His kingdom, then this podcast is for you. Our goal is to offer practical training for effective evangelism in the Seventh-day Adventist ministry context, but we know that the principles we talk about here are applicable in many other churches as well. So, wherever you're doing ministry, welcome to the Propel podcast. If you're enjoying our content, please feel free to support us by leaving a comment on our podcast or YouTube channel. And if you're listening to the podcast, please leave a review on whatever platform you're using. Your feedback not only encourages us, but helps us spread the word so we can reach new listeners. This episode features Cesar Gonzalez, pastor of the Middletown Valley and Catoctin View churches in Maryland. He's an award-winning documentary producer and expert in young adult ministries, community service, and race relations. Cesar is passionate about connecting Bible stories to everyday life and empowering others through the Holy Spirit. His work has been recognized for its impact on youth, as well as on promoting unity in his community. Cesar has been a good friend of mine for many years, and every time we get together, we end up talking about evangelism and church growth and ways to grow the kingdom of God. In this presentation, Cesar talks about his experience of doing evangelism and how the community can help to pay for it. He talks about revitalizing the reputation of Adventists in his community, as well as the importance of building relationships. He emphasizes the difference between events and programs and the need to focus on meeting the needs of the community. We're going to hear from Cesar in just a moment. First, let me mention the sponsor of this episode, the Oregon Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. If you seek a community dedicated to spiritual growth, meaningful worship, and impactful service, the Oregon Conference is the place for you. Join over 36,000 like-minded members from 134 churches who share your passion for faith and fellowship. With a variety of programs and events designed to enrich your spiritual journey, you'll find opportunities to connect and learn and grow. Whether you're new to the faith or looking to deepen your relationship with Christ, the Oregon Conference welcomes you with open arms. To learn more, visit OregonAdventist.org and become part of this supportive community today. Let's turn now to Cesar Gonzalez's Church Revitalization Breakout Track from the 2024 Propel Conference. His topic, how to do evangelism and have your community pay for it.
I want to tell you the story of how I started this, and then I want to run through these as quickly as I can. Then I want to spend time talking about your individual churches and from my experience, what it is that you can do to start doing this sort of thing. So I worked at the North American Division for 10 years, decided that I didn't want to do that anymore, decided frankly I didn't want to work for the church anymore, and left and moved out to rural Eastern Shore, Maryland, to Cambridge, Maryland, the hometown of Harriet Tubman, where the Underground Railroad started and all these incredible things happened there. And I went out there not wanting to work for the church, but while I was out there, my circumstances changed and I needed a job. And then the conference called and said, hey, would you be willing to take this church in town? Man, I don't know if this is what I want to do. My wife said, I want to remind you, you need a job. So I took it. And what I learned, one of the first things that I learned was that Adventists had an awful reputation in the area. Awful reputation in the area. Let me tell you just let me tell you one story, okay? There was this couple that owned a gas station. They started attending one of the churches in the area, right? And they had been going there for a couple of months, and the elders got together and they went to the gas station and they pulled out all the pork and tobacco products and lit a fire in front of the gas station and burned them. This actually happened. And of course, in a small town, as you guys know, once something like that happens, nobody ever forgets. nothing ever is forgotten in a small rural area because not a lot happens, you know? And so you have these stories. There was another church in the area where the elders would come. They had a daycare center, and the elders would come and they would check the kids' lunches for meat to see if there were meat. And I mean, when stuff like that happens, nobody ever. And so I realized that one of the first things that I had to do was sort of revitalize our reputation in the community. Now, mind you, I'm talking about, I was there 13 years. It took me probably 2 years to hear all the stories and say, oh my goodness, because nobody wants to tell you the bad all at once, you know? But then I decided that I was doing this out of necessity. We were going to have to go into the community and start doing good things in the community in order to revitalize our name, or else nobody wanted to hear what we had to say. So that was my first impetus. It was just to change the dynamics of the relationship between the community and the church. And so I started going into community meetings and trying to meet people and doing this and doing that, just trying to build up a relationship with people. It had still, at this point, nothing to do with evangelism. I was just trying to get people to say, maybe these guys aren't so bad. And so we did a lot of things in the community and for the community, and it took, frankly, years. Okay? Because I think that I was using the wrong methods. I think that I was doing things incorrectly. I was doing it for the purpose of just building relationships. I didn't really have a focus on what it is that I was trying to accomplish. That came later. So the big break for us, we did a lot of cool things, okay? Worked with a lot of the downtown shop owners. We had clothing drives, a lot of stuff. And people knew who we were, but they still were not coming. We were not building relationships with the people. All right? And so the big break came when we had a flag camp. Do you guys know what flag camp is? Fun learning about God. In my conference, they would have a team for flag camp, and they would send them to the churches that couldn't send kids to their own camp, to the sleepaway camp. They would send these buses with a team and equipment and all this stuff, and then they would hold a day camp at the churches. So I did that one year, and it's a small church. We were able to gather 6 or 7 kids, and there were 5 team members with the flag camp. So it was almost 1-to-1. And I'm looking at this, and I'm like thinking about how much it costs, and cost is a big driver for me in all of this. Because I'll talk about that in a second. And I called my conference youth director and I said, listen, this is great, this is wonderful, but this is not working for me. I just don't see how we're getting the value of what you're putting in and what the church is putting in, what this is costing us. How about next year, I pay you a flat rate and you allow me to bring in as many kids as I can. You tell me what you need to make on 1 week, and we'll do it that way. And he said, okay. And as it turns out, that same year, there was a local organization. By this time, I was becoming well known in the community as kind of doing things for the community. A local organization that invited me, they gave me $1,000 to take a bunch of kids to a baseball game. And now this community had a lot of poverty in it. And so what they wanted me to do, this was the catch. They had the money, and this will become an ongoing theme in this. They had the money, but they didn't have the know-how, and they didn't have the personnel to do anything. And so they had money, but they didn't have anything to do. And so they called me and they asked me, would you gather 30, 40 kids to fill this bus to take? And so I went out on a Friday afternoon. The game is Saturday night. I went out on a Friday afternoon and filled up the entire roster of people to go. Right? And the next day, only half of them showed up. Because in this community that was so poor, their lives were so chaotic that they could not plan for the next day. They didn't have a ride, they didn't sleep where they thought they were going to sleep. So-and-so got sick and had to go somewhere else. We lost half of them, and I had to go out that night and find another group of kids to take them with me. We did that. It was great. One night, $1,000. I said to that organization, I said, listen, next year, instead of doing this, give me the $1,000 and I'll take care of those kids for a week. I know that I can do this. And they gave me $1,500 because they said, we need you to feed them too. So one of the big problems that was going on in this community was that during the summertime, the kids didn't have anything to eat. And so this started a process by which we went from 1 week flag camp to 6 weeks, and from 6 kids to our capacity was about 75, and we still had a waiting list. And we partnered with a bunch of organizations to do this. Now, in the beginning, I was very sort of, and I don't want you to make this mistake, sort of, oh yes, we're the little dog in town, can we be involved in whatever it is that you're doing, this and that and the other. And other people sort of drove what it was that we were actually doing at the camp. Now, we were doing fantastic things. These kids weren't on the street. They were getting fed. And I can tell you stories after stories. I had a pair of twins who saw their father get shot on their porch with a shotgun. And they watched him die on the porch, and then the next day they were at our camp, and we had to deal with stuff like that. I had trans kids that came and told me these incredibly awful stories of being treated one way or another, and challenging what I have felt and understood about these things, and I cried with these kids. I had several shootings that happened in the area right before, and the kids would end up in our camp. I had one kid that got airlifted the first day of camp because he had seizures that were so strong they had to airlift him from the camp. I mean, all sorts of things happened, but all these things strengthened us. But here was what my mistake at the beginning. My mistake at the beginning was that I was letting other people that were our partners drive what we were doing. There came a point around the pandemic where things weren't working out anymore, and I was afraid of losing these partners, and I was giving more than I was in charge of what we were doing. I remember that we had one lady that was on our board that was Jewish. And she kept saying, why do we have to have a Jesus party every morning? That's part of her thing. We had a Jesus party. And I knew her rabbi. Her rabbi was a friend of mine. I said, well, if your rabbi wants to come down and have the party, that's fine. Let him come down. And that's the only way that I held her off on certain things. But eventually it came to the point where it just wasn't work. And we had to take on all the commitment. Now, 6 weeks of camp for a bunch of kids that can't pay for it cost between $30,000 and $40,000. And we didn't know how we were going to do it. The pandemic shut us down, and we spent all the money that we had, we spent it on taking care of the staff that got sick in the pandemic. I had one kid that came up from Florida to work for us, and he spent 3 or 4 weeks in a hotel. Remember in the beginning of the pandemic, you had to be clear for 11 days or whatever, and then you had to go and get tested, and we kept doing that. And he spent like 3 or 4 weeks in a hotel room by himself. Oh, it's crazy. We spent all the money we had. And I said, well, I guess that's it. That's the end of flag camp. And that spring, we start in July, that spring, I had $600 for whatever. And I got a check for $15,000 from an organization in town. And they said, we have been watching you and we believe what you do and we want you to continue doing it. And then I got another check for $10,000. Now I had $25,000. I had to do it. I had to do it. But now I did it completely differently. And now it became an evangelistic thing. Now I want to talk to you before we get to the nitty-gritty of that. I want to talk to you about event versus program, okay? In the beginning, we did a lot of events. And events are great. They're wonderful. But the problem with events is that they don't build relationships with the people that you're trying to reach. They just don't. You have a concert, you have a yard sale, whatever. All these people come, they enjoy, you meet them, and then they're gone. And that's it. You don't see them again. And so you have to weigh What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And in my estimation, if you're talking about evangelism, what you're trying to accomplish is that you're trying to build a relationship with people in order to bring them into some sort of evangelistic campaign, right? And so events are wonderful if you just want to meet people, but they're not going to give you the relationship that you need. And so you need to weigh the risk versus the reward. How much are you spending on an event? And could you spend that money? I know churches that will do a concert and spend $20,000, $25,000 on one concert, and they have 3,000 people show up downtown or something. I've seen that happen, and it's wonderful, but then you don't ever see those people again. So what did we actually accomplish? And I'm sitting there thinking, man, I could run an after-school program for 3 months with $25,000, you know? And that is, to me, there's an ethics here. When you ask a small church to spend $10,000, $15,000 on flyers, I have a problem with that. And my board would have a problem with that. And we figured out that we could feed children for $10,000. Well, then why wouldn't we do that? All right? And so you have to ask yourself, I'm a big fan of the program. Events are necessary, okay? But I'm a big fan of the program because it allows you to see people over and over and over again. So you need to start with prayer. You pray alone, you pray with your leaders, you pray with the people that you're trying to reach as much as possible. Let me tell you a story about Antoinette. You pray with the gatekeepers. I went to visit somebody that was sick, and the receptionist at this place, her name was Antoinette. I didn't meet her until what I'm going to tell you happened. I would come in, I was twice a week to see this person that was sick. And one day she said, oh, you're the pastor? I said, yeah, I'm the pastor. And she said to me, oh, there's another pastor that comes here. And when she comes here, she prays with me. And I'm like, oh, she just told me, I need to. And from that moment on, I try to pray with everyone. I at least give it a shot. Hey, what's your name? Yeah, I'm a pastor. How are you doing? This and that and the other. Is there something going on in your life? Can I pray for you? And this has opened up a lot of doors in what it is that we're talking about, all right? Pray with everybody that you can pray with. Pray with everyone that you can pray with. You need to understand your context. Now, from what I'm getting from you guys, most of you guys are in small churches in rural areas. That's where this happened. And frankly, for this type of thing, I think it works better because everybody knows everybody already. And as long as you start to break into this network of people, you're able to break into the community. I think that Adventists, frankly, we're too isolated. We don't want to work with you know who my biggest allies were in doing ministry in this community? Was the Catholic Church. The Catholic priest came to my ordination. And when they asked all the pastors, their ordained ministers, to get up, he didn't get up. And all these ordained ministers came up, and I saw him later, and I said, Father, why didn't you? His name was Father Lawler. He's passed away now, sadly. I said, Father Lawler, why didn't you get up? And he said, Cesar, it's already weird enough that a Catholic is in an Adventist church. It would have looked super weird for me to get up there. And like, Father Lawler, forget it. These people worked with us incredibly well. They had a lot more room. They had a lot more money. They gave us everything that they had and said, do whatever you want here. And so they had a school that somebody had paid for, a wealthy patron had paid for in the 80s, and they never opened it. It was just a school sitting there. And we said, well, hey, we can put a camp in there, no problem. And we had a camp in there for years. And they were just wonderful to us. They let us run the entire place any way that we wanted. So you have to understand your community. You have to understand your members. And this is going to be a problem for some of us. Some of your people will say, wow, this is amazing, let's do it. Some of your people, you're going to have to get on board. The way that I did that was when I started to make contacts in the community, I would go straight to the top. In a small community like that, I would write the mayor, or if I saw the mayor in the street, Mayor, I have to talk to you. Can I have a meeting with you? I want to help you with this problem in your community. And I have never yet met a city official that doesn't take a meeting with someone that wants to help them, okay? And so I would take my problem members, the elder that didn't want it, that thought this was a bad idea, this and that, it's too much money, I would take them to the meeting with the mayor. I haven't met one church elder that doesn't want to meet with the mayor either. You know, everybody wants to say, oh, I had lunch with the mayor or whatever. And once they're sitting at the table with a community leader like that, and you say, yes, we can do this, both parties are in. The elder's there and they come back and they say, hey man, I met with the mayor and the mayor says that they need this and I think that we can do this for them. And it changed the dynamic completely. It took me years to figure that out. It took me years to figure out that what I was actually doing was sort of arranging power meetings between people that normally would not have these meetings. And that's what actually got things going. Your resources. We don't see our churches as the resources that they are. I know that some of us have like maybe AA meetings in them or something like, but the building itself is a resource. And also, all of the resources, we have Advent Source out there. All of the resources that Advent Source has out there, you can somehow figure out how to turn into community something or other. All right, let's continue. This is, of everything that I'm going to tell you today, this is the most important thing and the hardest thing, okay? You need to find the needs in the community. The days of sitting in a boardroom in your church with your elders and your church members there and saying, well, what are we going to do for the community? Those days have to end. You have to go and ask what it is that the community needs. And you need to ask the right people. You need to be asking people that are elected and the people that are already working in the community. And there's three reasons why. Number one, you're going to get the straight answer. This is what we need. It's not what your church thinks that is needed. This is what we need. Number two, you're building a relationship with these people because these people are the ones that are going to tell you how to get the money later on. And number three, if you come in and you don't try to build a relationship with the people that have been laboring for a long time, it builds bad blood between you and the movers and shakers in your community. You have to go in and you have to say humbly but confidently, listen, we'd like to help. This is what we can offer. And you have to build those relationships. Money is not the problem. The money is there, okay? I remember having the guy that made me realize this. I was in the situation I told you with Flag Camp. And I went to see my ACS director, who's now at Andrews, Ignacio Goya. And I asked for a meeting and I'm like, I have this money issue. He's like, yeah, come meet with me. And we had lunch and we sat down and I explained the whole situation. He said, not a problem at all. And I thought that he was going to write a check. I needed $15,000 for something. I thought he was going to write a check. He's like, no, don't worry, the Lord will provide. And I'm like, what? Ignacio, how dare you bring me here? I drove an hour from where I'm at to come meet you here to tell you about my problem, and you were going to tell me that the Lord will provide? You could have told me that over the phone and prayed with me. All right? He's like, no, you don't understand. Okay? You're looking in the wrong places. The Lord will provide. We're going to talk about that in a second. Money is never the problem. If you start meeting the needs of your community, either somebody will pay for it or the community themselves, depending on what kind of community you live in. Now, I went from a rural context that was very, very poor, and now I'm in a new rural context that's very, very wealthy. We're about an hour and 15 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. A lot of government contractors, a lot of fancy cars going down 270 from Frederick County down to Washington, D.C. There's always needs in a community. You have to understand your community and come to an understanding of what these people need. Just because they're wealthy or they drive nice cars doesn't mean that they don't have needs. So what we see in my new context is a lot of young families. And young families, as you understand, I'm sure those of you that have kids or have had kids, young kids, there are needs. Daycare is a huge need. What do we do with these children? I remember, what sold folks on flag camp the most, and we went from being this little ragtag thing where we were just taking care of the poorest kids, right? To being the best camp in the county because we wanted to give value. The YMCA was huge and expensive. They were the big dog in town. But people were leaving the Y to come over here to pay $10 a day for us because we understood what the parents wanted. The first thing that I told the parents was, I promise you, your kids will come back home tired. I promise you that. They're going to sleep well. I promise you that. And then, yes, that's a huge deal. That's a huge deal, especially during the summer. And then we tried to do things for the community that nobody else was doing. We understood that the need was a summer program, but everybody else was doing a regular summer program and frankly, some of them were better than we could ever do. They had horses or they had this or that, the other. We couldn't afford those things, but we had some resources. We had a fantastic musical team on campus, and we could teach the kids music stuff. We had gymnastics. Nobody else was doing gymnastics, and we could teach the kids gymnastics. And then we ran a film program also. We taught the kids how to make short films and actually put them into a film festival, and a lot of those kids won awards because of their films. So we would run a 6-week program, and at the beginning, this is where it all started to click for me in evangelism. At the beginning, the parents would come up. I would be there every day as a pastor. Hello, how are you? It's good to see you. How's Timmy? How's Bobby? Did he sleep last night? How's this and that? Building relationships. And I would say to them, hey, don't forget that the third Thursday is baptisms. Do you want your children to be signed up for the baptisms? If not, would you like your kids to be signed up for baptismal studies for later on? We're going to have another baptism. And so baptisms and evangelism became part of what it was that we were doing. And what clicked in my head was that people expect a church to evangelize. It's weird if a church does not evangelize. If you sell chicken, you want people to taste your chicken, and they're willing to give you a taste of that chicken. I love going to Costco. Yeah, guys have Costco out here, don't you? Love going to Costco. They want you to buy their stuff. They'll give you a taste of it. They're very upfront about it. And I remember I had been, because of one of these things, I had a gentleman that had started coming to the church because of one of the programs that we were doing to help the community. And he was coming over and over and over again. And finally, I felt the Holy Spirit say, you need to talk to this guy about becoming a member. And he'd been there months. And I went over to talk to him and I said, hey, have you ever thought about, you've been here and you fit in really well. Have you thought about being a member? And this guy said to me, I thought you'd never ask. I've been coming for so long and nobody's ever brought it up. Yes, I want to be a member. Be open about what you're doing. I had this mentality where we're doing good things for the community. I don't want it to seem transactional. Okay? We're a church. This is what we do. We take care of kids because of the love of Jesus Christ, but we also baptize people into the kingdom. That's what we do. And when I learned to be upfront about that, it changed the entire dynamic. All right? Money is not the problem. Let me tell you. Here we go. Be open about what you're doing. You're a church, do church things. People expect you to act like a church. God is preparing people to join a caring, loving church. We have to be that church. That's what we have to do, okay? This is very important. I started to meet with mayors and stuff after the whole thing in Cambridge where we were raising $40,000 a year to run this camp, okay? Because most of the kids could not afford it. So we were doing $40,000 a year. I had another church in another larger city, Salisbury, Maryland, And I decided during the pandemic to write them an email. And I wrote an email to the mayor's office saying, the headline was, I would like to help you with your youth problem in Salisbury. I had a call back within an hour. Who are you? What is it that you're doing? Well, I'm so-and-so from down the road, this and that and the other. Somebody had heard of what we were doing in Salisbury and they were familiar with our program. In a matter of a week, they had given us a community center that was about to open. They said, take this community center. We will pay for the insurance. We will pay for the power. You can have the building as much as you want as long as you run programming out of this building. And it was in the part of town that we needed it to be. It was this other church. We didn't have our own church. We were renting, so we couldn't use the church to do. So we were looking for ways to be able to impact this community. And they said, here you go. Take the center. The mayor came out, cut the ribbon. We were all there. I've got all the pictures. All the church members were all wearing ACS hats and doing all this stuff. And we started running programming out of that center immediately. And they paid for almost all of it. When you come to talk to these people, you need to understand that they have money. They have problems. What they don't have is manpower and other types of resources. You are helping them. And you have to walk in there confidently and say, hey, this is who I am. My organization is this big. We have expertise in these things. Pathfinding, oh my goodness. That's the next thing that we're doing in my new context over here is opening a Pathfinder club for the community, non-Adventists. Okay? And part of pathfinding, as you guys know, is baptisms. You take your baptismal. And I can't tell you, I remember this little girl. I can't remember her name now. Glory. I think her name was Glory. And her grandfather would drop her off every morning. And Glory wanted to get baptized. And her grandfather came and said to me, listen, Glory wants to get baptized, but there's an issue. I'm like, well, what's the issue? Like, I've never been baptized and I want to get baptized with Glory. That's always been my dream. Is it okay if I get baptized at the camp? Like, of course it is. Of course it is. And we went, a church of less, man, on a good day, when I got there were 14 members, okay? When we started doing this, we were in the mid-20s. By the time that I left, we were baptizing 8 or 12 people a year. Just from flag camp. Just because we were building goodwill in the community and people knew when we would have our stuff going on. So you need to understand what you bring to the table. Number one is manpower. These government organizations, they have money, but they don't have the manpower to go and do the things that need to be done. Curriculums and resources. Man, we Adventists have every sort of curriculum and resource that you can think of. For anything that you want to do, it's there. And you can say, we're experts on this, and this is our curriculum on it. And they're like, oh, that's great. Facilities, if you have a building, use your building. Say to the mayor or whoever, listen, you can use this building for whatever it is that you need. Ignacio Goya, I was just telling you about. During the pandemic, the same thing. He talked to his church, what should we do? And this is another church of 20, 25 members. And they said, you know what would be good? If we just opened our building so people could have their MOPS meetings. You know what MOPS is? Mothers of preschoolers. Their MOPS meetings. Do you think that we could do that? He said, yeah, sure. They opened it up for MOPS meetings. That turned into a cohort of families that were trying to... Remember the pandemic, schools were closing, there was all this crazy. They wanted to homeschool their kids, but not at home. They wanted to get together and have like a cohort of homeschoolers so they could work together, right? And it went from a MOPS meeting twice a month to having 130 families going through there every week to do their studies together. And that church went from 25 members. Now, this is not a rural church. This was in the city. That church went from 25 members to about 130 members in the span of like a year and a half because they were meeting the need of, how much did that cost? Electricity. Everybody raised the rest of the money, they raised it all to do everything that they needed to do. The point was to get people into programs, into relationships, and tell them, listen, we want to help you. We want to help you with whatever it is that you need. You bring experience and you bring organization. There's a lot of do-gooders out there. There's just one lone wolf. When you come in and you say, I represent a group of this many people, that brings power, especially to a small community like the ones that we're talking about. This is the second most important thing. Once you understand the context and you understand the needs of the community that you're trying to serve, this is the next important thing. You can't get to this point if you don't have point number one, but you only have one shot at this. If you fail the mayor's never going to call you back. And we got into a relationship with the mayor in our town that she would call us first before she would call her own people. Pastor, we have this issue or we have that problem. What do you think that you could do? And I would tell her, I can help you with this or I can't help you with that. And then she would go and talk to her own people because it makes them look good if they have connections in the community to get things done. You need to understand how much power you have as a representative of a church. It makes them look good if they can say, oh, my friends over at so-and-so will take care of this. Instead of having to get their own people in, pay those people, whatever, it makes them look better in the community. And of course, they're hoping that you'll vote for them later on. We have to mention that, but that's between you and the voting booth. I don't have anything to say about that. All right, and now I think not the last thing, but next to last thing, and then I want to get into your questions. You got to ask for money. You got to ask for it. Once you need a little bit of startup money to say, hey, well, if you need this, well, we can give you, we can provide this or that, the other, whatever for the need. It may be whatever you need. We can provide that much. But once you have a working relationship with these people, you have to ask the mayor, whoever, hey, do you know of any funds anywhere that could help us do more for this community? And they're everywhere. The states have money for stuff. The federal government has money for stuff, especially in rural areas. There are grants out there for one of my churches right now. It's got $10,000 to start a garden. It doesn't even have to be a community garden. They just wanted a garden in the area. $10,000. And what are we doing with it? We're starting a camp where the kids garden. And so the state is ecstatic. They gave us $10,000 and now they can take pictures of kids gardening and say, hey, we did that. They're ecstatic, all right? Ask for money from the community. If you're meeting the needs, and this is another, if you're in a wealthy community and you're providing something that is of worth to them, they will pay for it. We went from a context where people could not afford the camp that we were doing to now where we're charging $300 a week and people are paying it because there's no other camps in our area. If you meet the need, they will pay for it because childcare, like he was mentioning, childcare is way more expensive, especially if and we give discounts and stuff. Whatever it is that you do, if it meets a need, you can ask for money from it. Foundations, individuals, and the church, ask for money. If you're meeting a need, people will pay you gladly to do it. And lastly, you need to understand that ultimately, this is as much about your members as it is your community. If we don't give our members an opportunity to serve, then we become more and more disconnected and our churches start to shrink rather than grow. It is very important for our people to understand, like I said last night, that we are changed when we help and serve others. And this revitalized even the older members that I had there. Maybe they couldn't go and do this or they couldn't go and do that, but man, they wrote checks. Yes, Pastor, we believe in what you're doing. Here you go. And this really, really helped revitalize the churches that I was at.
Let's take a moment to reflect on what you just heard. A reflection practice is so powerful, which is why we emphasize it so much here on the podcast and at the Propel conference. So stop for a moment. Think about the things that Cesar Gonzalez shared and how they can be applied to your ministry. What was the big idea for you? How would you articulate that to somebody? How will you apply this in your own ministry? What are you inspired to do in your church? And when this episode finishes, I encourage you to pause for 5 or 10 minutes and just let your mind wander. This reflection time can be really powerful. Well, that's it for this episode. We'd love to hear from you. You can email us at podcast@propelconference.org. And please mark your calendar for next year's Propel Conference coming to Tacoma, Washington, April 27 to 30, 2025. Special thanks to Cesar Gonzalez for speaking at the 2024 Propel Conference and to the Oregon Conference for sponsoring this episode. This has been the Propel Podcast, inspiration and innovation to grow your church. The Propel Podcast is produced by the crew at Sermon View, and the event recording services were provided by Adventist Learning Community. I'm Larry Witzel, wishing you God's richest blessing in your own evangelistic journey. Please join us again next time for another episode of the Propel Podcast.